Hey guys, SoCal Val here. You are listening to the Hitting the Turnbuckle podcast.
Good evening and welcome everybody back to another Hitting the Turnbuckle podcast. I am your host, Adam Cousins, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague, one fourth now of our eight-man team now we've got here. He's back from his holiday. He's rested up after the kids threw him around the beach for a little while. Dave Robinson, good evening to you.
Good to see you, man. The team continues to grow.
It does. It grows at a phenomenal rate. But tonight is all about Buckle Up, our show with Ignite. We are nearly 2 weeks away from this event. They have just dropped a teaser out. So if you haven't already seen it, check on the socials. It's something that's big. It's an announcement that's going to be on the show. I am not telling you what it is. You'll have to come and see for yourself. But tonight, our guest is taking on Tommy Lawrence. And we all know that Tommy was on a couple of weeks ago. Had his say. It's now time for his opponent to say, the ULT, Josh Spicer. Good evening.
How we doing? All good?
We are good, Josh. Thank you for joining us. So 2.5 weeks away now from our event with Ignite at Buckle Up. I saw you a couple of weeks ago at Jurassic Pro Wrestling, Primal Instinct.
Yes, you did, yeah.
I was there in all my glory. So was the missus doing the socials. But for the Ignite fans, for people that may not have never seen you before, tell us about you. Where did it start? How did you start training, and who was your idols growing up?
So for me, it started, it gets a bit fuzzy, but it's around 2013, 2014.
Yep.
I think actually quite similar to Tommy himself, actually, which is something I found out about him. So that was quite nice to know that we've been going a similar amount of time. But no, about 2013, 2014, up in Peterborough for a small promotion that doesn't run anymore, called Full House Wrestling.
Okay.
And I was initially sort of trained by one Farron Hussey, who again, not really around anymore. Sort of after COVID, with a lot of things, a lot of places sort of packed it in during that time, which is a big shame, unfortunately. But I had sort of started training about 17, 18. I had I would say about 2-3 years of sort of, maybe about a year of training before I got onto shows. Then there was maybe about 2-3 years of on shows, in ring competition, that sort of thing. Then I had had to take a break for a good 2 years or so, just for medical issues, personal issues like that. Had 2 shows back after I came back from that, and then COVID happened. So I had, unfortunately, not my choice, but I had a good 4-year break from that period. So although I started almost 8-9 years ago now, it hasn't all been smooth sailing the entire time.
Certainly doesn't seem that way.
No, not at all. Yeah, and obviously no one could really predict what happened with the pandemic, so it was a bit of a shame.
Definitely. Go on.
Oh no, I was going to say, since then, sort of following up from that, I sort of buckled down a bit more. I in between that break and in between that break and COVID, I had a short stint of training up in Leicester with Joe Connors.
Okay.
Obviously, former NXT UK player, one of the, for me at least, from how long I've been watching the British scene, he's easily one of the the staples. He is one of the head figures of it. Then I started training sort of just after lockdown. I say sort of the first September after lockdown. Started training at Square One in Stevenage, and really since then it's been green light go. It's all full steam ahead from there. Sort of, I really count last year as my first. Like I said, while I've been around since for a bit, I'd really only count last year as my first full proper year, seriously getting into wrestling, because that was really the first year I had consistent amount of shows. I think I had the most shows I'd ever have wrestled that year. I think actually it worked out that the shows I had in that year were more than all the other shows I'd had previously combined. So it really took off in quite a nice way. And since this year, it's really been just as good, if not better. I mean, I've had several more debuts than the last year, and the work keeps coming in consistently, which is the dream for everyone. It's been brilliant.
That's good. You can't knock the work or the hustle, as they say in these.
Absolutely,
as the kids would say nowadays. Josh, tell us when you were growing up and you got into wrestling, or when you got into wrestling, who was the actual wrestlers or organizations you looked up to?
So really, for me getting into it, I think I found with a lot of people sort of I've come to know is my first real like I probably had it before, but my first real exposure to wrestling that got me actually into being a wrestling fan was like SmackDown versus Raw, the games. Because at the time as a kid, I probably wasn't that big into wrestling, but I think it only took like, after school going around a friend's house one time, he showed me this game that I knew about wrestling. I didn't really know about it. And from there hooked. Just that's all it took.
We see me and Dave are slightly older than you, Josh,
Maybe just a bit.
Just slightly. And our childhood or teenage years was the Attitude Era.
Yes, yeah.
We were in, but Dave was more of a WCW fan, wasn't you, Dave?
Yeah, I was a big WCW guy back in the day. That was a long time before you started watching though, Josh, from the sounds of it.
Yeah, I think really about my sort of dip in was about 2006 or so, when I was about 9, I think.
Cool.
And it really sort of started that sort of, I wouldn't necessarily call it like the ruthless, like it was sort of the tail end of like the ruthless aggression, where they were sort of about like verging on like the TV-14 like rating, not quite just before the PG era sort of thing.
Yeah.
So really like,
how much do you go back to, Josh? How much when you're kind of, I don't know, whether it's part of your training, I suppose, or as part of what you do to prepare yourself inside and outside of the ring, is there anything that you go back to online? Obviously, with the WWE Network and YouTube, you've got unlimited access to pretty much all the wrestling of all time. Is there anything that is before the era you started watching that really interests you?
I mean, for the most part, like I can't claim to be like an expert on it or anything like that, but a lot of sort of recommendations and stuff I get to recommended to watch is sort of your sort of, I'd say late 80s, early 90s, sort of like All Japan and all those sort of bits, where even like New Japan, I feel like it came into its own a bit in the last maybe like decade or so. So that's where a lot of my knowledge of that sort of wrestling comes from. But definitely from recommendations from trainers and stuff like that, it's always been things like older Japanese stuff. Because like if you go back and look at it, it is, decades ahead of its time in an era where it really, like, when the boom of wrestling was sort of the Attitude Era, where it was, for the most part, I feel like the reason it was so mainstream is because the entertainment part of it was sort of what picked up with it, because like all the stuff they got away with, that sort of thing. But the wrestling itself from like the Japanese era would like, it's a million times ahead of itself from the time it was around. It's ridiculous, and there's so much you can go back and take from there that you can bring into, a modern show today, and it wouldn't look out of place at all.
No, exactly that. Is that where your character's based on? Then a bit of new stuff from Japan.
So yeah, I lot of from pretty much as far back as I remember. I mean, it started with stuff like Pokemon and stuff like that. A lot of I tend to gravitate towards around a lot of like Japanese influences, and for the character itself, is sort of the aesthetic I go for is very much based on a sort of a cyberpunk aesthetic. So sort of like the games and the stuff, and like. So one of my favorite films of all time is Akira, the old sort of like 90s anime, and that is again anime based, is heavily Japanese influence. So I think that's where a lot of it comes from.
Yeah, definitely things that there's so many contrasting styles nowadays. If you could pick, I don't know, let's ask a random wrestling question at this point just to get the feelers sorted out. If you could pick three wrestlers. Not necessarily on the circuit, but 3 wrestlers either that you've seen, that you've watched when you were, training or anything like that, to go in the ring. So it's Fatal 4-Way. It's you and 3 others. Who's it going to be, and what the event is it going to be? So what's the pay-per-view going to be?
Okay. Oh yeah. So I think so. For me, my biggest background from that sort of era, or like when I first started getting into it, I was obviously, for the longest period, sort of the 2-3 years after I got into it, was WWE. But then I quickly snapped and I was a huge TNA kid. I loved, and that's again a lot of my influences come from TNA. So if it was a Fatal 4-Way, I say the first pick definitely is my all-time favorite wrestler is Chris Sabin.
Brilliant.
And then leading on from that, the only the clear way for me to go is then Alex Shelley.
Yeah,
A huge Machine Guns fan. So I
you,
feel like that can.
what do you make of that now? Because they're now Alex Shelley's the Impact champion. Saban's now the
Exactly. It's like I've been keeping up with TNA sort of maybe the last year or so, because I think it's definitely sort of coming into its own again now. It's sort of, I think for me the twilight era of TNA was those sort of 2006 to sort of 2010, maybe sort of early sort of Hogan era was where it really started dipping. I feel for a lot of people, and then obviously they had all the issues with GFW and Anthem and all that fun stuff. But yeah, I feel like it's really coming into his own now, and it's sort of like it has a good reflection of acknowledging the past of TNA with obviously the current champions and stuff like that, but also doing a really good job of sort of bringing new people into the fold, but also not relying necessarily on the sort of what's popular and stuff like that, which I feel like was a big trend of TNA to get sort of the recently released guys and all that sort of thing, which they do to an extent, and I feel like, for me at least, I could definitely do without sort of the pop-ups from people like Bully Ray and Tommy Dreamer. Like, I don't really care for that sort of thing.
Interesting. Although Bully Ray just cut one of the best promos ever the other week.
That's the thing. Like, I feel like I can. Don't get me wrong, he's brilliant, and I can absolutely respect what he's done and where he's come from. But I feel like TNA is doing a good job at the moment of sort of, well, saying that two of their champions are older guys that they've had around. I feel like they're doing a good job of pushing towards sort of the newer rather than relying as much on the old.
Yeah.
Who would be the fourth man or woman in that match with you then, Josh?
So I think if it was purely for in-ring style and people who will influence me, the fourth person would absolutely be Chris Brooks.
Okay, I know Chris.
So from purely the Brit rest side of things, he is almost by far my biggest influence. But not only how he wrestles and how he portrays and how he brings himself, but also the journey he's taken of sort of going to Japan, but not necessarily, New Japan, because for me, New Japan is great, but I much prefer like sort of the fringe stuff like DDT and like, Big Japan and stuff like that.
Yeah, but that links quite nicely as to my next question, to be honest. Is that something that ultimately you would like to do yourself? Of how much is wrestling in terms of a big part of your life? Do you really want to progress and get to that next level? And would there be an opportunity for you to perhaps do that should things line up?
Yeah, I think for the most part, I think, yes, last year was really sort of like the make or break. Not necessarily I'd already had a career that was worth keeping, but it was like, right, I'll put my effort into it, see what comes of it. And if sort of the effort I put in is then, I get that out of it, then maybe it's something from pursuing. And really it has been. And this year has even, amplified that even more. But for me, definitely, I think if I had a career goal at the moment, for like a very end career goal, would definitely be sort of some form of regular sort of, I guess, like working in Japan for definitely. But also I feel like the alternatives now are so more available with obviously WWE not being just the one big sort of English speaking promotion. You've got like, your AEWs and, I would say, like Impact and stuff like that. But I think for me, since again, so much of my influences and so much of sort of the stuff I consume is Japanese based, it would Japan, like without a doubt, Japan would be like the no-brainer.
Yeah. I suppose you having Chris as your kind of inspiration and somebody whose career you've followed, and that gives you a lot of hope and encouragement that you could do something similar.
Definitely, for sure. It was quite nice because I just before the pandemic, and unfortunately now they're not around anymore, but Chris himself did a seminar at Good Wrestling, and really I must have chewed his ear off for like half an hour just chatting. But yeah, it's really, really nice to see. And I think there's also the sort of path he took, I think, for originally, and I might be wrong, but he was only meant to be out there for like a month or so on like a tour.
Yeah.
But then COVID happened, and now he's been over there for like 3 or 4 years.
Well, I'm not 100% on the facts of the story, but from what I gather, he kind of got stuck there, but it was the best thing that could have happened to him.
Yes, yeah.
Japan has always been the place where he wanted to go. He's not been a massive WWE guy growing up.
Yeah.
So, it was one thing, I suppose, off the back of the pandemic for him personally, it actually worked out quite well with him being stuck in Japan.
And I think that's sort of because, again, for regularly working with places like DDT, and he promotes his own shows occasionally, like the shows they've done sort of with Troco Pro or I think he's done some shows with Drew Parker where it's in a bar. There's no ring, just in a bar with a couple of mats. And for me, with stuff like that in DDT, like that's the stuff that, like, you know, don't get me wrong, like, obviously Osprey Omega the other week was, you know, sensational match, but for me, at least in my head, moments stick out more. So a good 6-star wrestler match is also going to be great, but you know, when you scroll through Twitter and you see like a couple of wrestlers in a field like wrestling with an elephant, you know, like that's what for me sticks out more. And like even stuff like when he first went over there and they did like a battle royal, but it was in a swimming pool, like a swimming center, and there's just a gif of him doing a figure 4 leg lock on another guy going down a water slide. Like, that's the stuff that really like sort of I enjoy about wrestling. I think that it's such a wide sort of art form that you can have that silly bollocks and people are like, yeah, that makes sense because it's wrestling. Of course it makes sense.
Yeah.
That's always my thing about wrestling. I always think it can be as fun as you want it to be. And for the most part, obviously you have your naysayers about that sort of thing. But for me, that's as enjoyable as it can get for the most part.
Exactly. It is. Going back to your training quickly, Josh, before we move on to some more games. What was the thing that took you by surprise the most when you were training? I mean, I trained for 4 weeks. And it was a simple body slam that told me I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. Like, even if I wanted to, I would just concentrate on watching it on the TV, going to watch it in the States and doing this that I'm doing now. What was it for you? That was there one particular thing that you like, holy shit, that hurt more than what he should have done?
Oh, like all the time. Like the one thing I remember, thing that stuck the most was sort of with taking your first 4 bumps is remember sort of your main thing is your breathing.
Yeah.
So if you're just about to take a slam and you've just taken a big like inhalation of air, you get slammed, the wind gets driven out of you. That is a terrible feeling. is on, like, you'll see it happen. Like, it's happened to me. Like, it happens to everyone every now and then, and you'll see in a match clearly, like, there'll be a difference between someone taking a slam and, you know, selling their back, and there'll be another clear difference of someone who's just been winded because they're very much not selling the wrestling. They're selling, oh shit, like I'm struggling to breathe at the moment. But I don't know what it is, and I feel like for a lot of people who stuck with it, I would just think that something is inherently wrong with these people, like me included. Like, there was nothing really that made me go, oh no, this sucks, and like there was never anything that really clicked. I was like, oh, I think I just loved it so much that there wasn't one thing that could particularly deter me from doing it.
No, that's fair. As I say, body slam for me, I was done. Thank you very much.
Oh, don't get me wrong, that makes you way smarter than half the people. You don't get it wrong at all.
Mine was running the ropes, as simple as that sounds, and you probably can relate. Man.
In
fact, no, now that you say that, yeah, I remember so at the time, the ring that we were training, we'd only be able to do it at the end. We'd train every week, and every week would be on mats, and the last session would be in a ring every month. And at the time, the ring that we used was one of the best rings in the country because the owner, Farron, he would be, at the time, he was doing the ring for Progress. He would be up and down the country doing the ring for pretty much everyone before most promoters got their own rings. But yeah, the moment you hit the ropes and you're like, this is way harder than like you expect them to be like elasticated almost, but no, you've hit them as almost like a brick wall sometimes. And I just remember having, for weeks and weeks after, I would just have these massive red marks along my back, and I think I've genuinely still got some marks permanently on my back from how like stiff these ropes were. Like, they're no joke, the ropes.
I can definitely relate to that.
Tell you one thing I would say, just interrupt. Just what I would say, when I was at Jurassic a couple of weeks ago with Primal Instincts and you were there, that ring was naff hard. It sounded a lot harder.
You say that though, Bret's ring is arguably one of the nicest rings.
Is it really?
Yeah, genuinely, it's quite comfortable. But wow. you do genuinely you turn up. Sometimes you turn up to a venue, and a lot of the times you sort of, the first question you'll ask the first person you see who, you know, it's like, unless you know, you're like, okay, whose ring is it? And it will vary, but that could sometimes indicate how the day's going to go. Because some rings don't give an inch, but some rings are quite comfortable to fall in.
I'll go in.
I just heard it and I was like, Jesus, that's back. Go on, Dave. Go on.
Yeah, Josh, obviously you alluded to earlier, off the back of COVID, there's been a real kind of boom in wrestling worldwide, and definitely in the UK. Have you noticed that at the training centres now? Has there been a big influx of perhaps younger people, children, or people that haven't done it for a while coming back to it because of how well wrestling's doing in the world right now?
I definitely say I feel like there are more for when I was around, for when I started training. The main reason for me was where I went is purely because it was half an hour down the road, which was quite fortunate for me, because I feel like for a lot of people back sort of 2013, 2014, for most part, you'd have to go upwards of an hour to get to somewhere to train. Whereas now I feel like the availability, like for where I'm based, sort of in Cambridgeshire area, like there still aren't a huge amount of options. For me, Square One is probably the closest. There probably are a few maybe a bit closer, but that's, even then it's like an hour drive to Hitchin, Stevenage. But even then, from then towards London area, you've got places like Hustle, you've got Catch 22, then up in like, you know, Wales, you've got New Wave. There's all sorts around now. And I've noticed a lot more sort of in the, especially at Square One, because I'm there fairly regularly, you do notice sort of you almost get classes that come in waves, like sort of, I'll notice sort of the beginners classes, you know, every maybe couple of weeks, they'll be filled with completely new people, just because there's almost so many people coming in, at least, you know, either whether they're just dipping their toes in or they're like, cool, I want to be a wrestler. There's so many more people, I feel like, that, like when I was training back in the day, we sort of there was 5 regular people that, you know, would be there every week. Then maybe once every 2-3 months, a new person would pop in, and maybe only one of the 4 people that we saw new from that period would stick. So
Yeah,
I feel like there's way more people coming through now wanting to at least give it a go than there was before. And I think that's mainly because of availability and sort of, I guess, how professional it is now. Because for me back then, it was, we paid £15 a week, and we'd be in a sports hall with some mats. And then, like I said, we were lucky enough to have the guy who ran it had his own ring, which was like, oh, cool, that's brilliant. But for the most places, it would be on mats. And now, looking back to where I used to train to where I have now, with Square One, it has its own facility with gym facilities, all that stuff. I know Catch 22 is similar. They've got a ring that's permanently there. You can always just book in time to go in, which for me back then, that was unheard of, to have a place that always has a ring set up to try it in. And I feel like because it's so much more ahead of itself now, I feel like there's so many more better facilities that you can use and try it, that it makes it way more sort of enticing to be able to come to.
Yeah, I think with the addition of so many more end goals, as you say, WWE, AEW, Impact, NWA, there's so much more to. You don't have to have a particular style or a particular look. You just got to have something.
Exactly, yeah. And I feel like the boom sort of, like, I definitely feel sort of the just before COVID, really, Brit Wrestlers probably, it was in its peak, and I don't think it's quite got back there yet. But for me, at least, the more sort of promotions pop up, the more people get eyes on sort of, oh, you know, there's wrestling pretty much in every sort of local area. I mean, for me, obviously, as much as, you know, you were a kid and you're like, oh yeah, I want to be a wrestler, I want to be a wrestler. For me, it was one evening in Huntingdon, which is about 15 minutes from me. What used to be Southside Wrestling, which is now part of Rev Pro, they were just running a show in a hall, and you had the people on this card. This card was full of people that would be like the main events now. I remember sort of 1 or 2 names you can't mention now, but people like RJ Singh and like people like that on these shows. And it took me, because I would go regularly with my dad to these sort of Southside shows, and it maybe took 1 or 2 shows. I was like, well, these guys are wrestling sort of every month. This is sort of a regular thing for them. So it's not just what's on TV that's about that you can sort of get involved in. And then once I started training and realized there was so many more places like Southside that were around, it was like, oh, there's this entire world that you like was completely unknown to me at the time, but now is sort of like the background of what I was watching at that period.
And are there more opportunities now, Josh, as well, in terms of companies where you can get regular work every weekend? You know, is that, and in turn, does that kind of drive up the earning potential for wrestlers as well?
Absolutely, yeah, like absolutely, for sure. There are so many places, like almost it seems weekly, that I'm learning about a new place that sort of, oh, there's a show over there, or there's a show over there. Sort of, it makes it way more enticing to know that the opportunities are available, sort of thing. That for me, back when I first started training, because I was young, I didn't drive, and sort of I didn't really know about how to network and that sort of thing. I would only wrestle once every 2 months for my home promotion, and that was it.
Yeah.
Whereas now, sort of last year was predominantly shows with UBW, sort of now is my home promotion. But since then, towards the end of last year, I got more opportunities with Sacrifice in Bedford, who are great sort of what's the word, charity-based organization. They put on brilliant shows, and they get a lot of the top guys from all over who are willing to come down. So it's been quite nice because I've been able to wrestle people who I wouldn't probably expect to wrestle, sort of from my area. Because I like a couple of weeks ago, I got to work with Axe 2, the Nuxton and Benjamin, who are two of the best in the country. But I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity without places like Sacrifice. And now, sort of through becoming really good friends with Alex Echo, I've had chances at Jurassic, like with a couple of weeks ago. And since then, like the opportunities are so much more available. And even probably the one that sticks out for me the most is earlier this year, I had a match in Tidal up in Huddersfield, which for me, Huddersfield, that's the other side of the world. Like I would never have thought I'd like this early sort of into the return to my wrestling. I would never thought I'd be up in Huddersfield sort of within like the second year of getting back into wrestling, which still boggles me for the most part. It just shows that the opportunities are there, and sometimes it takes it's a lot of hard work. Sort of, sometimes you might message someone and be like, hey, I'm not being like, oh, hey, give me a match. I'm like, oh, I'll come down and I'll help with the ring and all that, the classic stuff of grafting for it. Because I very much come from a place of, back when I was younger, I would always have almost social anxiety of wanting to message promoters and stuff like that. Because for me at least, it seems very disingenuous. Obviously, everyone wants to wrestle and everyone wants to get paid, but for me, for the most part, it can seem to me at least disingenuous to be like, hi, here's my footage, book me. For me, I'm very much I'll message a promoter and first thing I'll be like is, hi, can I come help out? Won't even mention my footage, won't even mention bookings or anything like that. I just want to get a foot in the door, say hi and that sort of thing. And it's opportunities have come of that sort of thing as well. So they are there. It's awesome, just the work that goes into it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really encouraging to know if any young wrestlers or anybody thinking about giving it a go, that there is that progression available.
And I feel like a big example. So for me, while I sort of, like I said, I started in 2014, and that really, I think that time there was probably a lot less opportunities. Obviously, I didn't help myself with all the networking thing, but since I've been at Square One, there's been a handful of people that I've almost, while they started sort of around, they've only been wrestling for a couple of years, and the main people that sticks out to me are people like Adonis Payne, Artemis, Harrison Leon, who I know you've had on there, and Tony Sin, who are four people that I'm quite close with that have all started. I would say a lot of them probably only started about 2 years ago, but the level that they're working at already and the opportunities that they have available is, for me, I almost look at them and be like, oh, back in my day, we didn't have that. I'm almost jealous of what they've got now, because it's taken me a couple of years for that.
Definitely. Speaking of matches, I've just been scrolling through Twitter, and Ultimate British Wrestling, the week before Buckle Up, have just announced your match, funnily enough.
Oh, yes. Yeah, they have, haven't they?
Against Jackson Hart. You'll be going on Saturday, July 15th. So please try not to hurt yourself too much, as we do.
Yeah, and I know that it's almost quite a bit of a almost a testing match, because I know Jackson's already qualified for the breakout, so I feel like I've got almost 2 weeks in a row. I've got something to prove. I've got a match against someone who's already qualified, and then I've got my own match against someone to qualify. So
you do
busy week there. Busy week.
It is going to be a busy week for you. We'll get on to Tommy in a minute, but first, before we wind up, get on to Tommy. Let's play our last few games. So.
Go for
First game is a word association game. Dave knows this very well. We play it with a lot of our guests. So I'll give you, or Dave will give you as well, a name of a wrestler, and you tell us what is the first word or phrase that comes into your head when Z name gets mentioned. I'm going to throw the first name over to you, Dave.
Oh, well, I think we spent a bit of time talking about him, so we've got to go with Chris Brooks as the first name. I'll throw at you, Josh.
I would say for Chris Brooks, creative.
There you go. I'm going to go TNA original AJ Styles.
Revolutionary.
Revolutionary.
I would say.
Okay.
Like I feel like he was the forefront of what the new era of wrestler that was about. He is sort of the blueprint for that.
Yeah, Dave.
Okada.
Oof.
I would generational.
I'm not even going to go with Japanese names because if you listen to our AEW review, me and Japanese names do not get along.
Oh, it's taken me a bit to sort of get a hang of it, of being like, for the one big one for me was the fact you had two Tanahashis, like Hiromu, and that confused me to no end.
The one that gets me every week at the moment is Takeshita.
Yeah.
You're getting better, mate. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you got it there.
Yeah, they'll throw another name out in a couple of weeks and I'll just be hitting my head on the table. The next one for me, I think you mentioned him already, Fallen Angel Christopher Daniels.
It seems a cop-out, but I want to say sort of revolutionary as well, in that same mold as AJ Styles, of sort of, while he obviously, I feel like his praises don't get sung on the mainstream as much as someone like AJ Styles. I feel like, again, he is, you go back and you look at not only his TNA work, but his Ring of Honor work, his PWG work from the early 2000s. He's sort of helped make that blueprint for what wrestling is now. Like, 2 decades ahead of his time, sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Dave, one more from you before we do the random wrestling question.
Oh, I've got 2 if you don't mind, Dad.
Yeah, go.
First, Zack Sabre Jr.
I don't know if I have a word, but I would, the best phrase I'd use is the best technical wrestler.
Cool.
And I don't mean that in a sense of he can do the moves really good. I feel like of all the technical wrestlers that you can watch, he makes technical wrestling entertaining to watch. Because I enjoy technical wrestling, but he takes it to a different level, to where you're almost constantly watching and seeing how he moves and stuff like that. And you have to say people like Jonathan Gresham, who is undoubtedly really good in his right, but I don't think he makes the technical wrestling as entertaining as Zack. No. And I think for me at least, Zack he's probably in my top 5 all time for just wrestlers, because I think he is that good at what he does.
Zack, for me, well, I'll always say this now, every week, it will be orange bollocks, because that's what he calls it.
And that's my favorite. As much as I love Zack's wrestling, my favorite thing, I can't remember which G1 it was, but it was when we had the elections going on, and pretty much after every G1 match, after he lost, he would cut a quick bit on the opponent he just lost, but then he would spend about a good 5 minutes just ranting about Boris Johnson. And they were the funniest sort of 2-minute video. Like every week you'd get a new one because the G1 was going on, and they were the funniest things to watch. Just because he would just lose his nut for 2 minutes, completely nothing to do with wrestling, but it was really entertaining to watch.
I know he's had a phenomenal career, but I'm glad that people are seeing, like a wider audience are seeing it now that he's on national television in America.
Yeah, it's almost as a fan, it's rewarding to see like I mentioned, sort of the I got into Brit Wrestling around 2014, to sort of see him go from, wrestling in a hall with 30 people to now, singles champion in New Japan is ridiculous. Like on American pay-per-views, like regularly, stuff like that. It's really nice to see, and it's I want to say inspirational, because it is, but also you have to take into account that someone like Zack is above even the best that are coming up now. Like he is one of those people you look at and go, not only is he really good, but he is something special as well as.
Yeah,
cool. It's a great answer, man. Last one. Well, you got one, Ed?
No, I was going to say your last name. Go.
Yeah, last one. Just a guy that's getting a lot of glowing reviews in the UK, and he's been over to America. Michael Oku.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would say probably, if not one of the top 3 in the country at the moment.
Yeah, we are.
I think he's got that sort of. I've watched him. I've watched his matches every now and then, but I was helping ring crew at not the one that just went this Friday, but the last Riot Cabaret show.
Yeah,
and he had a match with Callum Newman, and they were cut for time, so it was only like a 7-8 minute match, but it still sticks out as one of the best matches I've seen recently. It was ridiculous, and I think the Riot Cabaret show prior, he had a match with Robbie X, which was again just phenomenal. I think he is one of the best in the scene right now, like without a doubt, and he's someone I like because not only he has the single leg crab, which is one of my favorite submission moves. So every time I look at it, I'm almost a bit of justification for the single leg crab because it's an underrated move.
It is indeed. Right, let's move on. So this is random wrestling questions. This will just be in my head. I'm just thinking of a few. I'm going to start with, what is your favorite? So we do a top 10 series on this show. And we've done a few. We've got untold more to come. One of the ones that caused a lot of contention within our ranks, Dave. You're lucky to still be here. What is your favorite wrestling finishing move?
Oh. So the one that pops to head immediately is the package power driver.
Yeah.
Because I feel like my golden period for wrestling was sort of the 2014 era, of just as Black and Gold NXT was getting started, but almost you would have at the time you'd have PWG shows, which was almost pretty much NXT before NXT, all the guys on there. If not that, then definitely the Awful Waffle, Chuck Taylor's Omega Driver, because for me in the early periods of sort of getting my wrestling was when I sort of hedged out of WWE. I was very much watching TNA, but then it was also just finding all these sort of American indies on YouTube. Like mainly the thing that got me back into wrestling, sort of that period of when you're at school where wrestling's not cool sort of thing. What got me back into it was actually on YouTube was deathmatch music videos.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of deathmatch wrestling, but because of that, I then sort of branched into like early CZW, and you would have like the best of the Super Juniors. They did their own, and you would have all these like guys who are now in AEW and in WWE, and always it just stuck out was the Awful Waffle by Chuck Taylor, because how we'd pop them up and then just almost spike them down. It always stuck out in my head as such a brutal finisher.
It is. It absolutely is. Your this is not necessarily a favorite of pay-per. Well, it's called favorite pay-per-view, but it's not necessarily the favorite pay-per-view because the matches is like, if you could go to any pay-per-view, what would it be? So, for example, mine's the Royal Rumble. I'm going in January.
So do you mean just in general?
So if someone said to you, you get an opportunity, you can fly next year to wherever you want to go to watch one payper-view.
Here's a free ticket.
Here's a free ticket.
Okay, so not like if you go back in time and go that sort of thing. So, I would, it'll probably Rumble for me.
Yeah, I can't wait until January. I'm just waiting for the announcement as to where it's going to be.
I feel like my immediate one would be All In, but I'm already going to that. So.
Me too.
So I'd definitely say sort of Rumble or Mania. It has to be one of those two.
Okay. What did you make of the talk about WrestleMania in the UK, Josh?
I was watching Money in the Bank, and it was one of those things where I had the opportunity to go, but I was like, I've already spent the tickets on All In, so I'm not gonna spend more than I need. And I literally was like, I wasn't fussed about going, but as soon as Cena came out, I was like, I've missed it.
My son
to see Cena in person would have made my life.
My lad was on the barricade, because we were sitting probably about 7, 8.
Yes, I think I saw the pictures you posted of where you were.
So obviously you got Cody up in front of him. Cody walked over to him and stood up on the back. But I'll never forget, because I wasn't doing the barricade bit. It was my girlfriend and my son. And I was sitting there on a chair because I'd already heard that there was a segment planned for about the mid part. And it was Grayson Waller eventually. And when his music hit, I turned to look at my son, and that's the face that when you say, and Dave, you can say that when your kid pulls that face that you will never that he knows he's never going to forget it, or she knows that they're never going to forget it.
Yeah,
that was the face that he pulled, and I just went, I wish I had my camera ready. That was the one that I wish I'd got. But Cena's.
Don't get me wrong. I would probably be pulling the exact same face.
A lot of people were.
Yeah,
I've gone through that stage of people my age of as a kid, Cena was the best. As a teenager, hated Cena. But now, as a sort of mid-20s, I'm like, okay, I just can't not respect him.
I like
for all he's done.
Marmite relationship with me. I loved him, hated him. Then I realised he supported Tottenham, and I was like, well, okay, I need to like you now. And then I met him WrestleMania 26/7. I booed him when I walked up to him for a laugh, just because that was what it is, and he laughed as well. Then we talked Tottenham for a while, and then that was but I've always respected him. It's just been
I feel like since not only that, but since wrestling as well, I've sort of come to respect like the fact he's had such a long career.
Yeah.
as a wrestler, I can respect that more than someone who's maybe had a shorter career but maybe had better matches, sort of thing. I can really respect the longevity of what he's done and how he's well, not necessarily stayed favourable the entire time to a lot of people. He has also always been a talking point. He's never really faded into the background, and whether that be because he's been pushed to the moon by whatever corporations behind him or whatever. But I feel like he's always been relevant since whenever.
Certainly. Last question before we move on to your opponent.
Sorry as well, because I sort of skirted the question about the Mania itself and just started talking about Cena.
Yeah.
I would love him. I think Money in the Bank only proved that the UK crowds are the best crowds, like without a doubt. Definitely. I think absolute. Because it's always about more the politics behind it, rather. Because I think if they could do it without any sort of risk, they'd have done it by now.
Yeah. My thing is quite simple. The WWE you have to bid for it.
Yeah.
And they're already up to 2025.
Exactly. It's like even if we did get it, it's not going to be for another couple of years.
But I think AEW using Wembley was a nice little touch.
That's it. I almost think that the WWE doing Clash of the Castle was enough for AEW to go, oh, we could do Wembley. And now that AEW have done Wembley, I almost feel like that's enough to where WWE potentially could go. But I never really like to get into the rumors of anything. But from what I've picked up, because Twitter is Twitter and nothing is real on Twitter. That the segment was not scripted at all.
No, it wasn't scripted. No.
Yeah, so that's I've seen there's definitely one of those guys that will just sort of go and say what he wants.
So it's also not the first time he said it either.
Exactly, yeah. So it's always got to take it with a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
It just proved to me how important it is to have competition in wrestling or in anything else. It just brings out the best out of every promotion and every athlete.
With anything, I think wrestling in particular, it's always the adage of, rising tide raises all ships. Like the competition, absolutely there should be competition there, but when you get the thing I hate about Twitter is the tribalism of like, I'm way over it at this point. But I feel like if you've got two massive companies now that are putting on regular wrestling that's like to each to its own is good.
Yeah.
And I can't see how you don't get me wrong, I probably have a preference to AEW at the moment, but I'm not going to be like, oh, I like AEW. WWE should go out of business because we've seen what happens when there's only one predominant company, and sometimes WWE for itself has, within the last 2 decades, it has almost droughts that have lasted years long of just really being stale and boring, and like that. I feel like that comes of when you have a top dog. That really, when there's nothing to challenge that, it can be a bit. They get a bit monotonous and a bit in their own routine, sort of stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we love all wrestling promotions on it, and we love talking about it as well. But we totally understand what you mean about the tribalism. There's plenty of room for banter.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just nastiness or tribalism. It's not really. Hopefully, we can work on that as a fandom.
Yeah, exactly that. Final thing before we move on to Tommy. Your favorite wrestling entrance music?
So it's not necessarily my favorite, but I feel like the scientific answer is Edge. I think that is equivalently the best theme. I feel like because it hits all the notes of it's first of all it's just a good song.
Yeah,
it's recognizable, so almost like Sting. It has the glass break, the you think you know me, the if you can smell, there's one of those, it's instantly noticeable. But for me, for my music tastes, I feel like I really enjoyed a lot of sort of the 2014 era ROH themes that I feel like I think the guy was called Adam Massacre that did them, but like Kevin Steen had a great ring entrance music. The Briscoes still have a really good one. Adam Cole's obviously he's had really good ones since then, but his I've Got Something For You was one of my favorite songs just to listen to. I love that. But I would say overall, and the one that sort of, I at the moment, my absolute favorite is The Guns from AEW.
Yeah.
I love that song.
They need to make it Many Men, though.
I did like the Many Men one, to be fair, but I don't know what it is about I think just because my music taste sort of fits, I'm about sort of the synth wave and stuff like that. It scratches something. But I would say if one stuck out immediately in my head, and I feel like because the entrance goes along with it, is Naito's from New Japan.
Yeah,
I think that's a solid pick for how it goes. But yeah, sort of, like sort of Ring of Honor 2014, a lot of those, but also like 2007 WWE, like I feel like it's a forgotten one at this point, but Mr. Kennedy's first
brilliant.
Turn Up the Trouble is a banger.
Yeah,
so good.
Just Dave, we was in me and Andy, the other co-host, was in the Money in the Bank shop at the O2, and your favorite wrestling theme, come on,
Brood.
They did. They played the Brood. They did indeed.
Brood, another good one. I feel like it gets memed on a bit, but I really like Sheamus's original theme.
Oh, Written in the Stars. Was it Written in the Face? Written in My Face, wasn't it?
Written in My Face, yeah.
Yeah. That's
one of mine. And then I feel like, again, more because the entrance goes with it, is Batista's as well.
Brilliant.
Can't not do the firework machine guns.
I was right next to that once.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, loved everything.
Amazing.
Anyway, let's move on. Buckle up. Let's finish up. Buckle up.
Yes.
23rd of July. Oh, I got that. Yes, I did get the date right. I see Don't kill me. Tommy Lawrence, he had his say on you.
Yeah.
Now time for you to respond, Josh.
It's really, do you know what? I was looking forward to this Buckle Up just purely because I feel like it would have been a good competitive match. But I maybe because he's got something he feels he needs to prove, or obviously, with it being sort of the breakout sort of thing, but he's come in with a bit of almost a nasty attitude about it, which, if that's what he needs to convince himself that sort of that's what he needs to prove. But for me, watching the interview, a lot of it, he was taking all these shots, but he wasn't really saying it with his chest.
No.
I think there's a lot of look at me, look how strong, look how fast, but sort of didn't seem very confident about it to me. And I feel like that's almost we've got the edge, because don't get me wrong, he's a strong lad, he's a fast lad, he's bigger than me, he's a handsome lad as well. I mean, I'd probably have him beat on hair. I'll say that.
I lose that one all the time.
Yeah, I think you would as well. But that's what almost disappoints me to a point, that I was really looking forward to a nice competitive match, and he sort of almost, I feel like he's projecting his insecurities a bit, I feel like he's sort of like he's really got something to prove, and he's just gone a bit nasty about it.
Maybe it could also be because he seems everywhere he goes, he seems to get put in these sort of breakout. Like Jurassic Pro's another one. He's in the. I can't for the life of me remember the name of the tournament, but he's in that.
The Indominus.
Thank you. He's in the Indominus tournament. There, he's in the breakout for Ignite. Maybe he feels a bit like he's better than that.
Well, I mean, I could say the same thing. My match with Ted that Rain got added to, which that was an Indominus match, and I could look back at it and be like, oh, I've been wrestling longer than both Rain and Ted, so I'm like, well, I'm above this, but realistically, I'm not above any of it. I feel like if the opportunity is coming, I should take it as it is, sort of thing. Like, I could easily say it's like, oh no, I should go ahead the breakout division. I've just come off of a 300-day title reign at UBW. In fact, I lost it last night, which I'm coming off with something to prove.
Yeah,
but I could throw all these words, I could shout all these names, and I could I'd be like, oh yeah, you're skinny, you're fat, you wear a t-shirt, blah blah blah. But words are cheap when it comes to it, really.
It's all that matters when that bell goes.
Exactly. And like I for how long I've been around, I've seen a million Tommy Lawrences. He is the next copy paste Will Ospreay wannabe. Like,
nice.
And that's all I can really say. So like I can respect him as an athlete. I think he's a very, very good wrestler. But if he's gonna start throwing stuff around like that, then all I can really say is that, come 23rd, hope that he can back up what he's saying, really.
Josh, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. There's a few tickets left. There's not many left. So if anybody's watching this and they were thinking, might get a ticket, What would you say to convince them to in regards to your match and in terms to the event overall?
Well, in terms of my match, I think, again, regardless of what Tommy wants to say about how weirdly better he thinks he is than me, I think we're going to, regardless of that, regardless of any animosity he's coming in with, I think we're going to have a competitive match, regardless of if he thinks he's going to beat me in a couple minutes or whatever. But in terms of the show itself, Buckle Up is something I've been saying to people since I was booked for it, that for me at least, looking at the card, and this doesn't throw any shade on any shows I've been on before, but this is genuinely one of the most stacked cards I've ever been on. To where the point where every time someone new got added, I was like, well, you know, this like already had something to prove in the breakout scene, but now, you know, you've got, like, say, Michael Oko on there, Charles Crowley, you know, Corey McRae's on there. Like, the amount of talent on that card alone is ridiculous. Like, genuinely, I don't think I've seen a stacked card I've ever been on since I've been wrestling. It is insane the amount of talent that you can get in just a local scene. And I feel like if anyone who knows wrestling or knows the scene looks at that card, it should be a no-brainer. But to anyone that doesn't necessarily know wrestling and is on the fence about it, I think if you look at that and you think you come in with an open mind of, I might see something really cool here, I guarantee you will see something good there. I think with the talent that's on that card, it's impossible not to for it to be one of the best shows of the year, without a doubt.
I think it's twofold. I think it's going to be a great standalone show with a lot of talent on, but it's also going to be an opportunity to see some wrestlers that will go on to have really big, successful careers. And
absolutely,
hopefully, Josh, you're one of those guys as well.
I mean, you couldn't say it better. I mean, you've got people on there, like, for me, you've got people like Crowley, who's on there, who has been sort of one of the standouts of the last couple of years. Like I said, you've got Oku who's on there. Yeah. You've got Corey McRae on there. And then for me personally, someone who I know very well, you've got Artemis on there, who is only in her second year. And, like, I couldn't be proud of her how far she's come in that short time. She's breaking down doors almost every week at this point. She's wrestling more than most people I know. Yeah. Same with someone like Aluna Blue. In fact, I was on the show with her yesterday, and she was telling about how busy she is at the moment. When the last time I saw her was a year ago, where she was maybe only doing 1 or 2 shows, telling me how busy she is now with wrestling. It's amazing to see that these good people are getting their opportunities and they're getting the sort of the time to show how good they are and how hard they've worked for these sort of things. So I think, like I said, you look at that card and you can't see a bad match on there.
Millie, Aluna was down this end of in the Midlands a few weeks ago wrestling Millie McKenzie, you know, who was formerly signed at WWE. So it just goes to show, as you say, if Aluna wasn't doing too many shows, and in the short period of time, she seems to be on every show I see advertised for the UK.
Absolutely, and it's one of those things where it's a testament to hard work pays off. Yeah, because I know she's one of those people that's been working her ass. Same with Artemis, she's been one of those people that's worked her ass off for it, and it's come to show that the opportunities are now coming. Same with pretty much everyone on that card. Everyone is just really working their ass off for it at the moment, and it's come to show. And I think it's really going to show when people actually get in the ring that you're not going to get a better show for a good period, because I think everyone on that card has just got something to show and something to prove.
They do. And what a way to end it with that plug right there. So go and get those few remaining tickets, people. Come and see us.
Exactly. I wouldn't have said it if I didn't mean it.
Exactly. And of course, me, Dave, Andy, Rachel, Fiona, the Buckle Up crew will all be there to come and say hello as well. So come and say hello to us. Come and say hello to them. But for this evening, he has been Josh Spicer. He has been Dave Robertson. I have been your host, Adam Cousins. Until next time, guys, buckle down, stay safe. We will see you soon.